I used to believe Ethan truly loved me. Until that day, when I found the engagement invitation in his car. His and Vivian Sinclair's, the heiress of the wealthy Sinclair family. Ethan was getting married, but the bride wasn't me. And in front of me he was still the same gentle, considerate, perfect boyfriend. In the private lounge he and his friends mocked me in French. Keeping Lila on the side isn't much trouble. She's so obedient in bed, I can't bear to break up with her. They didn't know. My French scores were top of my class. For 3 years, I clipped my own wings, willing to be his caged canary. Now it's time to wake from this dream. I submitted my application to study at the top veterinary medical center in Boston. Ethan, you're getting married. And I'm going to fly back to the sky where I belong. Lila POV. Miss Hayes, working late again today? Mr. Ford has been waiting outside for you for quite a while. Sarah, a nurse, smiled and joked. I took off my work clothes, washed my hands, and smiled gently. There was an emergency surgery today. It took a bit longer than expected. I'm heading out now. Thanks everyone for your hard work. I pushed open the glass door of the veterinary hospital. The early autumn night breeze carried a hint of chill. A low-key, luxurious black Maybach was parked by the curb. The window rolled halfway down, revealing Ethan's handsome profile. 3 years together. He was the heir to New York's top financial empire, and I was just an ordinary veterinarian. Everyone said I was lucky, and I once believed Ethan truly loved me. I opened the car door and got into the passenger seat. Ethan naturally leaned over to fasten my seatbelt, his crisp, witty cologne enveloping me. Why so late today? I'm taking you to meet some friends. His voice was low and lazy, with its usual indulgence. A dog had complications during birth. I just finished doing a cesarean section. I explained softly, reaching for the wet wipes in the glove compartment to clean my hands. But the moment I pulled open the drawer, my movements froze. Deep in the glove compartment lay a white invitation. The invitation bore 2 familiar names. Ethan Ford and Vivian Sinclair. My breathing stopped for a moment, my fingers trembling slightly. Vivian was the heiress of New York's Sinclair family, also from an extremely wealthy background. So while I'd been standing at the operating table until my legs went numb for a few $100s in surgery fees, my boyfriend had already set a wedding date with someone else. What's wrong? Ethan noticed my reaction and glanced over. I calmly pulled out a wet wipe, closed the glove compartment, my voice so steady even I found it unbelievable. Nothing, just grabbing a tissue. Half an hour later, the car stopped at New York's most exclusive private club. The lounge door opened to reveal luxury and opulence, smoke curling in the air. The noisy conversation paused in unison the moment they saw me. Ethan took my hand and led me to a seat, his expression untroubled. Before I could adjust to the atmosphere, Marcus, sitting across from us, raised his eyebrows, his tone dripping with undisguised contempt. Ethan, why'd you bring Lila Hayes? This lounge has poor ventilation. Why do I smell that animal stench? The moment he finished speaking, low laughter rippled through the lounge. My fingers tightened around my glass, knuckles turning white. Every day at the hospital I dealt with sick animals. Even though I showered and changed clothes before leaving work, to these rich kids' noses, I seemed to permanently carry an unwashable animal smell. I turned to look at Ethan, but saw him only carelessly swirl the wine in his glass. He didn't speak up for me. Instead, he said in that tone one uses to soothe a pet, "Honey, ignore them. They're just joking." Marcus saw Ethan wasn't angry and grew bolder, deliberately speaking in French to the person beside him. Ethan is getting engaged to Vivian next month. What are you planning to do about Lila? You're not seriously going to keep her for life, are you? Everyone present knew I came from an ordinary background, had even paid for college with scholarships. They were certain I couldn't understand French, and their laughter grew more unrestrained. Ethan took a sip of wine and replied in equally fluent French. The marriage alliance is my family's idea. The wedding is just going through the motions. Lila is very obedient, doesn't make a fuss. Keeping her on the side isn't much trouble. The lounge erupted in laughter again. Someone mocked. True, these broke women are so easy. Give them a little money and they'll behave. The mocking laughter assaulted my ears. No one noticed that sitting quietly in the corner, the light in my eyes was extinguishing bit by bit, turning into deathly silence. They didn't know I'd taken a second language in college. My French scores were top of the entire program. 3 years together, Ethan spoiled me lavishly, bought me designer bags, let me live in his mansion, but never once introduced me to his family. I thought he was protecting me, afraid I'd be hurt. Only today did I understand. In his eyes, I was never a partner who could stand beside him, but a very obedient, quiet pet. In that moment, I suddenly felt even confronting him was unnecessary. From now on he could marry his Vivian, and I would be a veterinarian. We would have nothing to do with each other anymore. Lila POV. After everyone had been drinking for a while, the atmosphere in the lounge grew increasingly heated. I felt cold all over. When the gathering ended, everyone headed out together. I lagged half a step behind. Just as I reached the hallway, I heard a voice laced with malice behind me. Lila. I stopped and turned. It was one of the wealthy guys who'd laughed the loudest in the lounge earlier. He looked me up and down and sneered. Ethan's getting married soon. If you're smart, you'll take the money and leave. Don't think that just because you've been with Ethan for a few years, you can marry into a wealthy family. Someone like you who deals with animals all day. How could you compare to Vivian? I looked at him quietly, my face showing no ripples, as if watching a clown. Ethan, who'd been walking ahead, noticed I hadn't followed and turned back, coldly glancing at the man. Watch your mouth. The man awkwardly touched his nose and didn't dare say more. On the drive back, the car was terrifyingly quiet. When we arrived at the apartment they shared, Ethan took off his coat and hung it on the rack. From behind, he pulled me into his embrace, his chin resting against the hollow of my neck, his voice low and soft. You had a rough time today? I won't take you to these kinds of gatherings anymore, so their words won't upset you. I didn't struggle, only asked in a flat tone. Do you think I embarrassed you? Ethan chuckled softly, turned me around to face him, and reached to ruffle my hair, but I dodged by tilting my head. His hand froze in midair. He said helplessly, What are you overthinking? I just don't want them targeting you. Honey, you just need to know that you're the only one in my heart. That's enough. The only one in his heart. Then what was that white invitation? What did keeping on the side mean? I looked at his affectionate eyes and felt nothing but disgust. I didn't expose him, only said flatly, I'm tired. I want to shower. Ethan let me go. All right, go shower. I'll handle some emails in the study. When I came out from my shower, Ethan had just gone into the bathroom. He casually left his phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up with an IN's message. Ethan's password was my birthday. I'd never checked his phone before, but today, I couldn't control myself from reaching out. Unlock. Open INs. Besides me, there was another account at the top without a name. The newest message read, Honey, we're trying on wedding dresses tomorrow. Can't you come keep me company tonight? I know you can't bear to leave your girlfriend, but we're getting married soon. You need to show me some respect, right? Scrolling up, there were chat records of them discussing wedding venues and selecting diamond rings. Though Ethan didn't reply much, every sentence showed the indulgence and compromise a fiancé should have. Looking at those glaring sentences, my heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand, the pain suffocating. I put the phone back and reset the message to unread. Before long, Ethan came out of the bathroom with a cloud of steam, picked up his phone and glanced at it. His expression changed slightly. He turned to look at me sitting at the vanity, a flash of apology in his eyes. Lila, there's an urgent matter at the company. I need to go over there. I probably won't be back tonight. You should get some sleep early. He left in such a hurry, he didn't even wait for my response. After a while, my phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. In the photo, Ethan sat on the sofa in the Sinclair family villa. Vivian leaning against his shoulder, the two in an intimate pose. Then came a text message. With just one word from me, he'll still abandon you to come find me. Lila, after we get married, what will you be? A shameful mistress? I stared at the screen as tears finally fell. This knife was wielded by Vivian, but handed to her by Ethan himself. I wiped away my tears, opened my laptop, logged into the hospital's internal system, and pulled up a document. Application for selection of outstanding physicians for 2-year advanced training at Boston's top veterinary medical center. Without hesitation, I filled in the information and clicked submit. Ethan, since you're getting married, I wish you a happy wedding. Lila POV. The next day, I went to the hospital as usual. The director was very surprised when he saw my training application. Lila, this training opportunity is rare, but you'd have to spend 2 full years in Boston. Does Mr. Ford agree? I lowered my eyes, my voice calm but firm. This is my personal career plan. It has nothing to do with him. I hope it can be approved as soon as possible. Seeing my resolute attitude, the director sighed and signed it. All right, the procedures will take about a week. Prepare for the handover these next few days. After work, I returned to the apartment and took out a large black trash bag, beginning to clean out the room. Couples mugs, couples slippers, clothes he'd bought me, even the stuffed animals we'd gotten together at the amusement park. Everything that held memories of us together. I mercilessly threw into the trash bag. I'd just carried 2 large bags of trash to the door when I heard the lock turn. Ethan pushed open the door. Seeing the trash bags on the floor and the much emptier living room, he frowned slightly. Why are you suddenly cleaning out so much stuff? Seasons changing, spring cleaning. I'm throwing out old things I don't need anymore. My tone was indifferent, and I didn't even glance at him. Ethan didn't think much of it. He walked over and hugged me from behind, his tone carrying a hint of coaxing. The company had too much going on last night, I couldn't keep you company. There's a charity gala tonight. Want to come with me? In the past, I would have considerately declined, afraid I didn't understand those high society rules and would embarrass him. But today, I turned to look at that affectionate face and nodded. Sure. The gala was held in the ballroom of a 7-star hotel. I wore the haute couture gown Ethan had someone deliver and walked into the venue on his arm. The moment we entered, we attracted quite a few glances. We hadn't walked far when a woman in a wine-red evening gown with exquisite makeup approached. It was Vivian from the photos. Vivian's gaze lingered for a moment on my arm linked with Ethan's. A flash of jealousy crossed her eyes, but she quickly masked it and spoke with a bright smile. Ethan, you made it. Ethan's expression showed a moment of discomfort. He instinctively withdrew his arm from mine and introduced us. Lila, this is Vivian, a good friend of mine. Good friend. I laughed coldly inside, but my face showed no reaction. Vivian held a ragdoll cat in her arms and looked at me coquettishly. I've heard Ethan has a girlfriend who's a veterinarian. Finally getting to meet you today. Miss Hayes, my cat hasn't been feeling well lately. Since you have so much experience caring for these little animals, could you take a look? She emphasized the last sentence heavily, her contempt undisguised. Several of Ethan's friends gathered around and chimed in. That's right, Miss Hayes. This is Miss Sinclair's beloved pet, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. More than your annual salary. You'd better take good care of it. I stood there, my gaze cold as it swept over everyone, finally landing on Ethan's face. Ethan frowned slightly, seeming to think Vivian's words were too much, but he didn't speak up to scold her. Instead, he said to me, Lila, if you know how, just take a look for her. The last trace of hope in my heart shattered completely. I withdrew my gaze, glanced at the cat, my voice cold. Miss Sinclair, the cat is severely stressed. Noisy environments like galas aren't suitable for bringing pets. If you truly loved it, you wouldn't use it as a tool to show off. Also, I'm a doctor, not a servant. Vivian's expression stiffened. Just as she was about to lose her temper, Ethan interrupted her. All right, Vivian. Lila's right. Have someone take the cat back. He seemed to be defending me, but the intimacy and indulgence in his tone was like a thorn stabbing deep into my heart. Lila POV. The charity auction began. Ethan and Vivian's seats were arranged together. The organizers' deliberate arrangement in consideration of the upcoming marriage alliance between their families. As Ethan's date, I could only sit on his other side. As auction items were displayed one by one on stage, Vivian kept leaning over to whisper to Ethan. The two appeared intimate, like a couple. I sat beside them like a superfluous outsider. Our next auction item is a pet collar set with top-grade pink diamonds. Starting bid $2 million. The host's voice rang out on stage. Vivian's eyes lit up and she immediately raised her paddle. $3 million. Marcus from the back row whistled and laughed loudly. Miss Sinclair is so wealthy, spending $3 million on a cat collar. Miss Hayes, even if you did spay and neuter surgeries your whole life, you probably couldn't earn enough for this collar, could you? Low snickers rippled through the crowd. I sat with my spine straight, my gaze fixed forward, as if I hadn't heard those taunts. Ethan frowned, turned to look at me, and said in a low voice to comfort me, Ignore them. What do you like? I'll bid on it for you. I turned to look at him, at those deep eyes, my tone so calm it held no ripples. No need. I'm not worthy of such expensive things. Ethan thought I was sulking and immediately raised his paddle. $5 million. The entire venue buzzed. Vivian looked at him with delight. Ethan, are you buying it for me? Ethan didn't deny it, only smiled faintly. I felt the air here suffocating. I stood up. I'm going to the restroom. I splashed cold water on my face, looked at my pale reflection in the mirror, and took a deep breath. Just as I was about to turn and leave, the restroom door was pushed open. Vivian walked in on her high heels. Without outsiders, Vivian dropped her mask completely, her eyes contemptuous and vicious. Lila, I thought my message was clear enough. Why are you still shamelessly clinging to Ethan? I pulled out a paper towel to dry my hands, looking at her coldly. Miss Sinclair, please get it straight. I'm the one who's been with him for 3 years. Who's really the homewrecker here? Vivian laughed as if she'd heard the biggest joke. Love. You think there's real love in wealthy families? You're from an ordinary family, you're a veterinarian. You have nothing. What do you have to compare with me? Do you really think Ethan will marry you? She stepped closer, lowering her voice. He's just after something fresh, treating you like a toy. Next month we're getting engaged. If you're smart, you'll leave him quickly. Otherwise, once I become Mrs. Ford, I have plenty of ways to make your life in New York unbearable. Looking at her arrogant face, I felt no anger in my heart, only deep sorrow. I wasn't sad about Vivian's bullying, but about Ethan's tacit permission and indulgence. Don't worry, Miss Sinclair. I threw the used paper towel precisely into the trash bin. My tone as cold as if discussing something completely unrelated to me. I never take back trash. You two are the real couple. I wish you a lifetime together. With that, I ignored Vivian's furious expression and walked straight out of the restroom. When I returned to the ballroom, the auction had ended. Ethan held the velvet box containing the pink diamond collar and handed it to Vivian. Seeing me return, He walked over and put his arm around my waist. Where were you for so long? The gala's over. Let's go home. I didn't dodge his touch, only nodded obediently. Go home? No, that apartment full of lies had long ceased to be my home. Lila POV. The three of us walked together to the hotel's underground parking garage. Ethan had just pressed the car key to unlock when Vivian quickly walked over in her high heels, her face showing just the right amount of distress. Ethan, my car won't start, and my driver took the day off. Could you give me a ride home? Ethan frowned slightly and instinctively glanced at me. I stood in place, my expression indifferent, as if I hadn't heard Vivian's words. Seeing Ethan hesitate, Vivian bit her lip, her voice softer. Mom specifically told me today to come home early and rest. We still have to try on wedding dresses tomorrow. If you don't take me home and Mom asks. Hearing Mom and try on wedding dresses, Ethan's expression darkened, but he finally nodded. Get in. A flash of triumph crossed Vivian's eyes as she walked straight to the passenger seat and opened the door. Oh my, she suddenly exaggeratedly covered her nose, fanning the air in disgust. Why does the passenger seat smell like dog hair? Miss Hayes, you sit here all the time and don't bother to clean up? I'm allergic to animal fur. I watched her crude performance coldly. I was wearing an evening gown today and hadn't been to the hospital at all. Where would dog hair come from? Ethan's frown deepened. He looked at me, his tone carrying a hint of imperceptible irritation. Lila, sit in the back. Vivian has allergies. I didn't argue, didn't even hesitate for a second. I directly opened the back door and got in. My movements were quick and decisive, which actually made Ethan freeze for a moment. He probably expected me to make a scene, to feel wronged. But I was as calm as stagnant water. The car left the parking garage and drove onto the road. Vivian sat in the passenger seat, happily chatting with Ethan about their family's collaborative projects and the upcoming engagement party details. Ethan, that French restaurant has great desserts. Let's use them for the engagement party favors, okay? Sure. Also, the wedding dress. The designer said it'll be ready tomorrow. You have to come with me to try it on. I'll pick you up tomorrow morning. They chatted happily, treating me in the back seat as if I were air. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes. The neon lights flashing by outside the window alternated across my pale face. Listening to their intimate conversation up front, I felt wave after wave of nausea. I used to think Ethan was a man of few words. It turned out he just had nothing to say to me. In the social class he belonged to, he could be just as gentle, considerate, and talkative. The car first drove to Vivian's family villa. Before getting out, Vivian deliberately turned to look at me, her eyes full of a victor's pride. Miss Hayes, thank you for giving me the passenger seat today. Ethan, see you tomorrow. The car door closed and the car fell silent again. Ethan cleared his throat, attempting to explain. Vivian has been spoiled by her family since childhood. She says things that are a bit much. Don't take it to heart. I only took her because our families are working together. Ethan, I interrupted him, slowly opening my eyes, my gaze clear and cold. Pull over at the intersection up ahead. The hospital just messaged me. There's an emergency surgery and they need me to come back. Ethan was taken aback. It's so late and you still have to go back? I'll take you to the hospital. No need. It's not on your way. My tone was firm. The car stopped at the intersection. I pushed open the door and walked into the night without looking back. Lila POV. For the next few days, I practically lived at the veterinary hospital. Using work handover and emergency cases as excuses, I declined all of Ethan's invitations and didn't return to the apartment even once. Friday afternoon, the training approval documents were officially issued. Next Monday, I would fly to Boston. I arranged to meet my best friend Chloe at a coffee shop near the hospital. What? You're going to Boston for 2 years of training? And you're breaking up with Ethan? After hearing my words, Chloe nearly spit out her coffee. I stirred the coffee in my cup, calmly recounting the invitation, Vivian's provocations, and that phrase in the lounge about keeping on the side. Ethan, that bastard. Chloe slammed the table in anger, drawing glances from surrounding customers. I used to think he was one of the rare devoted ones among the wealthy. Having a marriage alliance with a rich heiress while still wanting to keep you as a mistress? How dare he? I smiled bitterly. Yeah, I used to think he truly loved me too. But now that I see clearly, it's good I can end this mistake early. When are you planning to make it clear to him? Chloe held my hand sympathetically. The day I leave. I lowered my eyes. I don't want to fight with him, and I don't want to hear his hypocritical explanations. Leaving quietly is the last dignity for this relationship. Just then, the wind chime at the coffee shop entrance rang. I instinctively looked up, and the color drained from my face instantly. The person walking in was none other than Ethan and Vivian. The two walked in side by side. Vivian intimately held Ethan's arm, tilting her head to say something, smiling radiantly. Though Ethan's expression was neutral, there was no resistance in his eyes. He even considerately pushed open the glass door for her. This scene stabbed my eyes and completely ignited Chloe's fury. These two bastards actually dared to show up right in front of us. Chloe shot up from her seat, about to rush over and confront them. I grabbed her, clutching her wrist tightly, my voice trembling slightly. Chloe, don't. It's not worth it for people like them. The commotion on our end caught Ethan's attention. He turned his head, his gaze cutting through several tables to collide directly with my cold stare. Ethan's body went rigid. He instinctively tried to withdraw his arm from Vivian's grasp. Vivian also saw me. Not only did she not let go, she held on even tighter, defiantly lifting her chin. Ethan's expression changed. He quickly walked to my table, his tone tinged with panic he himself hadn't noticed. Lila, what are you doing here? Vivian and I were just discussing business nearby and stopped in for coffee. Discussing business requires holding arms? Mr. Ford's business methods are truly unique. Chloe laughed coldly, her mockery merciless. Ethan's brow furrowed. He ignored Chloe, staring intently at me. Lila, let me explain. There's no need to explain. I stood up, my tone terrifyingly calm. Mr. Ford, this is your private matter. You don't need to explain it to me. We have things to do. We're leaving first. I didn't call him Ethan, but Mr. Ford. I pulled Chloe along and walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. The glass door of the coffee shop swung shut behind us, the cheerful chime of the overhead wind bell sounding like a mockery of the storm brewing in the street outside. Chloe's heels clicked furiously against the concrete as she marched beside me, her breathing shallow and ragged with suppressed rage. I didn't stop. My gaze was fixed straight ahead, tracking the gray autumn sky that hung low over the Manhattan skyline, heavy with the promise of rain. Lila, I swear to God, I'm going to lose my mind. Chloe spat her hands, trembling as she clutched her designer purse. The absolute nerve of him. Did you see the way he looked at you? Like he was the victim. Like he'd just been caught doing something slightly inconsiderate instead of parading his fiancée. Right in front of your face. I saw, I said quietly, my voice barely louder than the hum of passing traffic. And Vivian, that smug, plastic-faced socialite, actually had the audacity to hold on to his arm tighter when she saw us. She wanted a reaction, Lila. Wanted you to scream, to make a scene, to look like the crazy, hysterical mistress so she could play the dignified victim. Chloe stopped at the corner of the avenue, grabbing my arm to force me to look at her. Her eyes were bright, with protective fury. Why didn't you let me throw my hot coffee in her face? Why are we walking away like we're the ones who did something wrong? Because she's not worth the dry cleaning bill, Chloe, I said, offering her a faint, tired smile. And neither is he. I gently pried her fingers off my coat sleeve, my touch steady. If we made a scene, it would mean I still care. I continued, looking down at the damp pavement. It would mean Ethan still has the power to hurt me. But the truth is, I'm just tired. I want to go to sleep, and I want to wake up in a city where I don't have to breathe the same air as him. Chloe's expression softened, the anger in her eyes dissolving into a deep, painful pity. She reached out and pulled me into a tight, silent hug, her chin resting on my shoulder. 2 more days, she whispered into my hair. Just 2 more days, Lila. Then, you're in Boston, and you never have to look back. 2 days, I repeated, closing my eyes and letting the cold autumn wind wrap around us. When I returned to the veterinary hospital for my final night shift, the atmosphere was quiet, bathed in the soft blue glow of the emergency lights. The cages in the recovery ward were mostly silent, save for the occasional rhythmic thump of a dog's tail against the metal grating or the soft, raspy purr of a cat waking from anesthesia. I sat at the reception desk, systematically filling out the patient transfer logs. My fingers were steady on the keyboard, my mind functioning with a clinical, detached efficiency. My phone, sitting on the desk beside the medical files, began to vibrate. Ethan. I didn't answer. I didn't silence the ringer either. I simply watched the screen light up, displaying a photo of him that I'd taken during our first year together, a candid shot of him laughing in the kitchen of his luxury penthouse, his hair messy, his eyes filled with a warm, boyish affection that I had once believed was entirely mine. The phone rang until it timed out, only to start vibrating again 5 seconds later. Then came the text messages. Lila, please answer me. I'm outside the hospital. We need to talk. I know. You're angry about today. It wasn't what it looked like. Let me explain. I set the phone face down on the desk, picked up a medical file for a golden retriever recovering from a splenectomy, and walked into the ward. When my shift finally ended at 6 in the morning, the rain had started. It was a cold, misty drizzle that turned the streetlights into blurry, golden halos. As I pushed open the glass doors of the clinic, a dark figure stepped out from the shadow of the brick pillar beside the entrance. Ethan. He looked completely unlike the pristine, untouchable heir to the Ford empire. His designer wool coat was damp, his hair messy from the rain, his eyes bloodshot and shadowed with fatigue. He looked as if he had been standing there for hours. "Lila," he said, stepping into my path as I tried to walk past him. His voice was hoarse, carrying a raw, desperate edge that made my chest tighten with a brief phantom ache. "Mr. Ford," I said, my voice polite, distant, and completely empty of warmth. "It's early. You shouldn't be here." Ethan flinched at the title. "Mr. Ford? Lila, please. Stop acting like this. I've been calling you all night. I've been waiting here since 3 in the morning. I was in surgery." I lied smoothly, keeping my gaze fixed on the strap of my duffel bag. "And as I told you yesterday, my career is my priority right now. I don't have time for personal distractions." "Distractions?" Ethan let out a short, dry laugh that sounded like a sob. Reached out to grab my hand, but I stepped back, my movements so quick and deliberate that his fingers caught only the empty air. His hand hung suspended in the rain, trembling slightly. "Is that what I am to you now? A distraction?" "Lila, about yesterday. Vivian's father was in town for a board meeting. My family forced me to attend that lunch. It was strictly business." "I know," I said, looking him in the eye. "It's always business, Ethan. Your marriage is business. Your family is business. The marriage is just a formality," he argued, stepping closer, his breathing shallow and frantic. "I told you, it's just a contract to secure the merger. It doesn't change anything between us. I've already bought the luxury condo on the Upper East Side under a trust. It's registered in your name, Lila. You can move in next week. You'll have your own private driver, your own garden, whatever you want." "A condo," I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through his frantic explanations like a knife. "So I can be your obedient, quiet pet on the Upper East Side instead of the downtown penthouse." Ethan froze, his eyes widening in a sudden defensive panic. "Lila, that's not what I meant." "It is exactly what you meant, Ethan," I said, my tone incredibly calm. "You want to keep me on the side. You said so yourself, didn't you? Lila is very obedient, doesn't make a fuss. Keeping her on the side isn't much trouble." The silence that followed was absolute, save for the steady patter of the rain against our umbrellas. Ethan's face turned completely gray. The blood drained from his lips, his mouth opening and closing as he stared at me, his brain trying and failing to process how those words, spoken in a private, high-society lounge in fluent French, had reached my ears. "You," he stammered, his voice dropping into a terrified whisper. "You understand French?" "My grandfather was a literature professor who specialized in French poetry, Ethan," I said, a small, sad smile touching my lips. "And I was the top student in my university's language department. I didn't tell you because, well, I didn't think it mattered. After all, a caged canary doesn't need to speak, does she?" I took a step around him, my boots splashing quietly in a puddle on the pavement. "I'm going to get some rest now, Mr. Ford," I said, without looking back. "I suggest you do the same. After all, you have to try on wedding dresses with your fiancé tomorrow." The packing of my life took less than 2 hours. When I returned to our shared downtown penthouse, the space felt incredibly vast, empty, and sterile. The white marble floors, the minimalist Italian furniture, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, all of it had once felt like a dream, a fairy tale kingdom where I was the cherished princess. Now it looked like what it had always been, a beautifully designed cage. I pulled a large black suitcase from the closet and set it on the bed. I didn't take the designer bags Ethan had bought me. I didn't take the expensive jewelry that sat in the velvet boxes on the vanity, or the silk evening gowns that still smelled of his cologne. I took only what was mine: my veterinary medical books, my old sweaters, my comfortable sneakers, and the small, silver-framed photo of my grandfather that I'd kept on my nightstand. When I was finished, the master bedroom looked almost untouched, save for the absence of my presence. The closet was still filled with the expensive clothes Ethan had bought to turn me into a suitable companion for his private life, hanging like colorful skins of a person I had never actually been. I walked to the kitchen and set my keycard on the marble counter. Beside the key, I placed a small sheet of cream-colored stationery. I picked up a pen and wrote a short note. I didn't write it in English. I wrote it in the language they had used to strip me of my dignity, the language they believed was too refined for a broke woman who deals with animals.
Mon cher Ethan, tu as dit que j'étais obéissante, que je ne faisais pas d'histoire. Tu as dit qu'il était facile de me garder dans l'ombre. Aujourd'hui, je te rends ta cage. La clé est sur la table, ainsi que les robes, les sacs et les bijoux que tu as achetés pour habiller ton jouet. Je retourne au ciel qui est le mien. Ne cherche pas à me retenir, les oiseaux sauvages ne survivent pas dans les appartements de l'Upper East Side. Bon mariage, Lila.
I folded the paper carefully, slid it under the keycard, and walked out of the apartment without looking back. The elevator ride down to the lobby was silent. As the doors opened into the grand marble-walled foyer, the doorman, a kind elderly man named Arthur who had always helped me carry my veterinary sample boxes, smiled and bowed slightly. "Leaving early today, Miss Hayes?" he asked, looking at my single battered suitcase. "Yes, Arthur," I said, offering him a warm, genuine smile. "I'm going on a long trip." "Well, safe travels, miss," he said, pushing open the heavy glass doors for me. "New York won't be the same without your smile." "Thank you, Arthur," I said, stepping into the cool morning air. "Take care of yourself." I hailed a yellow cab, threw my suitcase into the trunk, and climbed into the back seat. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, I looked out the window at the towering glass skyscraper of the Ford residence one last time. The penthouse windows were dark, reflecting only the gray, indifferent clouds of the Manhattan sky. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. It was an email from the Boston Veterinary Medical Center, containing my flight confirmation and my orientation schedule for next Monday. "Your flight is confirmed. We look forward to welcoming you to the team, Dr. Hayes." I locked the phone, leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, and closed my eyes. The cage was open, and for the first time in 3 years, I could finally breathe. The clock on the dashboard of Ethan's Maybach read 11:30 p.m. when he finally pulled into the underground parking garage of his downtown building. He sat in the car for a long time, his hands gripping the leather-wrapped steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. The scent of Vivian's expensive, heavy rose perfume still lingered on his suit jacket, a scent he had endured for 4 hours during a formal dinner with the Sinclair family and their legal teams to discuss the prenuptial agreement. His mother had spent the entire dinner talking about the wedding venue, the floral arrangements, and the guest list of 800 high society figures. And Ethan had sat there, nodding politely, his mind completely consumed by the image of Lila standing in the rain outside the clinic, her eyes cold and empty of the warmth that had once been his anchor. "Lila is very obedient. Keeping her on the side isn't much trouble." The memory of his own words, spoken in that French lounge to Marcus, echoed in his mind like a physical blow. He had said it to protect her, to keep Marcus and the others from looking too closely at her, to stop them from targeting her with their vicious high society rumors. In his world, if you showed too much vulnerability, if you admitted you loved a commoner, the vultures would tear her to pieces. He had thought he was being smart. He had thought he was protecting his little canary by keeping her hidden, safe, and secure in his shadow. But he had never realized that his protection was a slow-acting poison. Ethan pulled his keycard from his pocket, opened the car door, and walked toward the private elevator. He needed to see her. He needed to hold her, to explain the twisted, cynical logic of his world, to beg her to understand that the marriage to Vivian was just a temporary contract to secure his father's succession. The elevator doors chimed and slid open directly into the penthouse foyer. The apartment was dark. "Lila," Ethan called out, his voice echoing quietly in the vast, empty living room. No answer. He walked into the kitchen, his hand reaching for the light switch. The bright overhead LEDs illuminated the pristine white marble counters. And there, sitting in the center of the kitchen island, was my silver keycard and a folded sheet of cream-colored paper. Ethan's heart skipped a beat, a sudden cold panic seizing his chest as he walked over and picked up the paper. He recognized my neat, elegant handwriting. Instantly, he unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the French sentences, his face turning completely pale as the meaning of the words sank into his mind.
Tu as dit que j'étais obéissante. Tu as dit qu'il était facile de me garder. Dans l'ombre.
The paper slipped from his fingers, fluttering onto the marble counter like a dead leaf. "No," Ethan whispered, his voice shaking. He ran to the master bedroom, pushing open the heavy double doors. He threw open the closet doors. The expensive dresses, the designer bags, the velvet boxes of jewelry, all of them were still there, hanging in neat, silent rows like a museum of a person who had vanished. But my worn sweaters, my medical books, my simple sneakers, everything that made me Lila, was gone. He ran to the vanity. The silver-framed photo of my grandfather was gone, leaving behind only a small, clean square of dust on the polished wood. Ethan collapsed onto the edge of the bed, his head buried in his hands as a low, dry sob escaped his throat. She was gone. She hadn't made a scene. She hadn't cried. She hadn't demanded half of his assets. She hadn't threatened to expose his affair to the tabloids. She had simply gathered her small, ordinary life and walked out of his world, leaving behind the expensive toys he had used to bind her to him. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed my number. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." He tried her IN's account. User not found. He tried her hospital's internal directory. Dr. Lila Hayes is no longer listed as an active staff member at this facility. Ethan stared at the black screen of his phone, the silence of the empty penthouse pressing down on him like a physical weight. He had thought he was the master of the game. He had thought he could have the Sinclair empire, the succession, and his sweet, obedient mistress on the side. But as he looked at the empty bedroom, at the neat rows of untouched luxury clothes, he finally realized the truth. Lila had never been his captive. She had simply been a guest who had decided, with an absolute, terrifying quietness, that the stay was over. The air in Boston smelled of salt, old brick, and the fresh, crisp scent of early autumn rain. I stood in the main lobby of the Boston Veterinary Medical Center, my hands tucked into the pockets of my brand new white lab coat. The facility was vast, modern, and filled with the steady, professional hum of a top-tier research hospital. Unlike the small private clinic in New York where I had spent half my time managing client complaints and trying to keep the wealthy pet owners from suing us over minor issues, this was a center of genuine science. Dr. Hayes? I turned around. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a matching lab coat was walking toward me, holding a clipboard and a cup of coffee. He had short, dark hair, kind hazel eyes behind a pair of thin-rimmed glasses, and a calm, professional air that immediately made me feel at ease. Dr. Adrian Thorne. He was the senior chief of pediatric veterinary surgery, and the man who would be supervising my 2-year advanced training program. Dr. Thorne, I said, offering him a polite, professional handshake. It's an honor to meet you. Thank you for selecting my application. Adrian smiled, his grip firm and respectful. The honor is ours, Lila. I reviewed your research on minimally invasive orthopedic procedures in felines. It was brilliant. Frankly, I was surprised you were working at a small private clinic in Manhattan. With your skills, you should have been at a research facility years ago. I lowered my eyes, a faint, complicated feeling passing through my chest before I cleared my throat. I had some personal matters that kept me in New York, but I'm ready to focus entirely on my career now. Good, Adrian said, his tone warm and encouraging. Because we have a very busy schedule ahead of us. We have 3 complex surgeries scheduled for this afternoon, and I want you to assist on the primary bone graft. He handed me a set of medical charts. Welcome to Boston, Lila. Let's get to work. For the next 3 months, my life was a blur of antiseptic, surgical steel, and the deep, satisfying exhaustion of a demanding career. I woke up every morning at 5, walked through the historic streets of Beacon Hill to the hospital, and spent 12 hours a day in the operating theater or the research lab. I lived in a small, cozy studio apartment near the Charles River, decorated with simple wooden furniture, my medical books, and the silver-framed photo of my grandfather. There were no marble floors, no designer bags, no luxury Maybachs waiting by the curb. But when I went to sleep at night, I didn't have to check a man's phone. I didn't have to listen to whispers in a language that was supposed to be a secret. I didn't have to feel like a shameful secret kept in a beautiful, gilded cage. Dr. Hayes, excellent margins on that suture, Adrian said as we stepped out of the operating room on a late November afternoon, pulling off our surgical masks. You have the steadiest hands of any resident I've ever trained. Thank you, Adrian, I said, a genuine, happy smile breaking across my face. Over the last few months, Adrian had become more than just a supervisor. He was a mentor, a colleague, and a dear friend who respected my mind and my passion. We often spent our lunch breaks in the hospital cafeteria, discussing complex cases or debating the latest veterinary surgical techniques over lukewarm coffee. There's a major pediatric veterinary conference in Boston next month, Adrian said as we walked toward the lockers. The Sinclair Ford Philanthropic Foundation is the primary donor, and they've invited our team to attend the Grand Gala. I'd like you to come with me as my co-presenter for our recent bone graft study. The name Sinclair Ford made my heart skip a beat, a cold, sudden weight dropping into my stomach. The Sinclair Ford Foundation? I asked, my voice slightly tight. Yes, Adrian said, not noticing my reaction. It's a joint venture between the 2 families. They've recently merged their philanthropic arms to support veterinary research. It's a huge deal, Lila. All the major players from New York and Boston will be there. I looked down at my hands, my fingers clenching slightly against the fabric of my lab coat. 3 months. For 3 months, I had successfully rebuilt my life in the clean, quiet air of Boston, convincing myself that the past was dead and buried. But as I looked at the medical charts in my hand, I realized that some ghosts are not so easily laid to rest. Lila, Adrian asked, his brow furrowing with concern as he looked at my pale face. Are you okay? If you don't feel comfortable presenting. No, I said, my voice suddenly turning firm, my gaze rising to meet his. I'm fine, Adrian. I would be honored to present with you. I had spent 3 years clipping my own wings for Ethan Ford. I was not going to let his shadow chase me out of the sky ever again. Back in New York, the grand offices of the Ford Group were quiet in the late afternoon. Ethan sat at the head of the conference table, his suit jacket draped over the back of his chair, his tie loose. Before him lay the draft of the final prenuptial agreement, its pages filled with the cold, precise language of corporate mergers and asset protection. Across the table sat Vivian, looking stunning in a designer tweed suit, her fingers typing rapidly on her phone. "Ethan, did you hear what I said?" she asked, her voice carrying an impatient, sharp edge. "The wedding planner said we need to finalize the floral arrangements by Friday. And the photographer needs our final confirmation for the pre-wedding shoot in Paris." Ethan didn't look up from the document. "I'm busy, Vivian. Busy." Vivian let out a short, angry breath, tossing her phone onto the glass table. "You've been busy for 3 months, Ethan. Every time I ask you about the wedding, you look like you're attending a funeral. If you don't want to marry me, just say so." Ethan slowly raised his head. His eyes were cold, hollow, and completely devoid of the polite, accommodating charm he had always used with her. "Do you want me to say it, Vivian?" he asked, his voice flat and dead. Vivian froze, her breath catching in her throat as she saw the absolute indifference in his eyes. For 3 months, since the night Lila had vanished, Ethan had changed. He had stopped attending the high society parties, he had stopped responding to his friends' messages, and he had moved out of the downtown penthouse into a cold, sterile hotel suite near his office. He had become a machine, working 18 hours a day, his only goal appearing to be the systematic expansion of the Ford Group's assets. And whenever Vivian tried to touch him, to hold his arm, he would pull away with a cold, polite disgust that made her blood run cold. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice shaking slightly. "What is wrong with you? Is it because of her? Because of that cheap veterinarian who ran off?" The name Lila made Ethan's hand tighten around his silver pen so hard the metal casing creaked. "Don't speak her name, Vivian," he said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, low rumble. "Why not?" Vivian shrieked, her pride finally snapping. She was just a commoner, a nobody who dealt with sick dogs. "She left you, Ethan. She threw your expensive keycard in your face and ran away like a thief. And you're still mourning her like she was some kind of queen." Ethan stood up slowly, his towering figure casting a long, dark shadow over the table. "She was a queen," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying a weight that made Vivian flinch. "And I was the fool who tried to put her in a cage." He picked up the prenuptial agreement and tore it in half, the thick paper ripping with a loud, sharp crack that echoed through the empty conference room. "Ethan," Vivian gasped, her face turning completely pale. "What are you doing? Our families." "The merger is cancelled, Vivian," Ethan said, tossing the torn pages onto the table. "I'm going to Boston next week for the philanthropic gala. I will formally announce the dissolution of the Sinclair Ford Foundation. My lawyers will handle the termination fees." "You're crazy," she screamed, her eyes wide with disbelief. "My father will ruin you. He will pull all of his assets from the Ford Group." "Let him try," Ethan said, walking toward the door, his face completely expressionless. "I've spent the last 3 months restructuring our debt. The Ford Group doesn't need your family's money anymore, Vivian." He stopped at the door, looking back at her one last time. "And as for you," he said, his voice flat as ice, "I suggest you find another man to buy your cat collars. Because starting today, you are no longer welcome in my world." The grand ballroom of the Boston Marriott was a sea of glittering crystal, evening gowns, and the low, refined murmur of the East Coast's financial and academic elite. It was the annual Pediatric Veterinary Philanthropic Gala, the most prestigious event of its kind in the country. Adrian Thorne and I stood near the entrance of the exhibition hall, where our research posters were displayed. I was wearing a simple, elegant black silk gown, my hair styled in a loose, sophisticated bun, my face glowing with a calm, quiet confidence. I wore no jewelry, save for a pair of small, silver earrings my grandfather had given me for my graduation. Dr. Hayes, your presentation was flawless, the president of the Veterinary Association said, raising his glass of champagne to me with a warm, respectful smile. Your research on pediatric bone grafts will save countless lives. Boston is incredibly lucky to have you. Thank you, Dr. Vance, I said, offering him a polite, genuine smile. It's been an honor to work under Dr. Thorne's supervision. Nonsense, Lila, Adrian said, stepping up beside me, his hand resting gently and respectfully on my shoulder. You did 80% of the primary research. I was just the guy holding the clipboard. The crowd laughed softly, the atmosphere warm and appreciative. Suddenly, the chatter near the entrance of the ballroom died down. The heavy double doors were pushed open, and a small group of security guards entered, clearing a path through the crowd. Behind them walked Ethan Ford. He was dressed in a flawless, custom-tailored black tuxedo, his posture straight and powerful, his presence immediately dominating the entire room. But his face was different, sharper, paler, his eyes dark and heavy, carrying a silent, dangerous energy that made the passing guests lower their voices. Beside him walked Vivian Sinclair, wearing a flashy, wine-red evening gown with a massive diamond necklace that screamed of wealth and desperation. She kept trying to hold his arm, but Ethan's arm remained stiffly at his side, his gaze scanning the crowd with a cold, searching intensity. "Ah, the New York delegates have arrived," Adrian murmured beside me. "That's Ethan Ford, the heir to the Ford Group. His family's foundation is our primary donor." I didn't answer. My heart had stopped for a brief, phantom second, but as I looked at Ethan, across the crowded room, the panic I had expected didn't come. Instead, I felt only a profound, freezing calm. He was still the same handsome, untouchable prince of the Ford Empire. But as I looked at him, I realized that the man who had once been my entire world was now just a stranger in an expensive suit. Ethan's gaze swept across the room, tracking the crowd of doctors and scientists. And then his eyes locked onto mine. He froze. His breath caught in his throat, his face instantly turning pale under the bright crystal chandeliers. He looked at my black gown, at my styled hair, at the calm, confident smile on my face, and at Adrian's hand resting gently on my shoulder. "Lila," he whispered, his voice so quiet it was lost in the noise of the room, but his lips formed the name perfectly. He immediately began to walk toward me, ignoring Vivian's protests as she tried to pull him back. "Ethan, where are you going?" Vivian cried, her heels clicking sharply as she tried to keep up. But Ethan didn't hear her. He saw only me. He stopped 3 feet away from our group, his eyes wide, filled with a raw, desperate hunger that seemed to swallow the light. "Lila," he said, his voice trembling slightly. It's you." I slowly turned to face him, my expression polite, professional, and completely empty of any emotion. "Mr. Ford," I said, offering him a curt, formal nod. "Welcome to the Boston Gala. This is my supervisor, Dr. Adrian Thorne." Ethan's gaze flinched at the title Mr. Ford, his eyes darting to Adrian's hand on my shoulder before returning to my face. "Dr. Thorne," Ethan said, his voice flat as he offered Adrian a cold, brief handshake. "I would like to speak to Dr. Hayes in private." "I'm sorry, Mr. Ford," Adrian said, his tone perfectly polite but carrying a firm, unyielding strength that made me feel incredibly safe. "Dr. Hayes is currently in the middle of a presentation with the president of the association. She doesn't have time for private discussions." Ethan's jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with a sudden, dangerous fury. "This is a private matter, Dr. Thorne. And as the primary donor of this facility." "You were the primary donor, Ethan," I interrupted him, my voice calm, clear, and perfectly steady. Ethan froze, looking at me in shock. "The Boston Veterinary Medical Center accepted a permanent endowment from the Vance Philanthropic Group this morning," I said, looking at the president of the association beside me. "The Ford Group's foundation is no longer our primary backer. So, Mr. Ford, your influence here is no longer relevant." Vivian, who had finally caught up, gasped loudly, her eyes wide with a mixture of fury and shock. "Lila, you arrogant bitch," she shrieked, her voice drawing the attention of the surrounding guests. "How dare you speak to Ethan like that? You're just a cheap veterinarian we let hang around. You're nothing without him." The ballroom fell into a deathly silence. Adrian took a step forward, his tall figure blocking Vivian from me. "Miss Sinclair, you are currently at a professional scientific conference. If you cannot maintain basic decorum, I will have security escort you out." "Escort me out?" Vivian laughed hysterically. "My family is the Sinclair family. Your family's contract with the Ford Group has been dissolved, Vivian," Ethan suddenly said, his voice cold as ice. He didn't look at her. His eyes remained fixed on my face. "Security. Escort Miss Sinclair out of the building. She is no longer a guest of the Ford Group." "Ethan," Vivian screamed as 2 of the hotel's security guards stepped forward, politely but firmly grabbing her arms and guiding her toward the exit. "You can't do this to me. You'll regret this. My father will." Her screams faded as the heavy double doors closed behind her. Ethan took another step toward me, his face pale, his hands shaking slightly. "Lila, please," he whispered, his voice carrying a raw, pathetic plea that made my heart ache with a brief, final pity. "Let me explain. I canceled the wedding. I dissolved the merger. I came here to find you. I will give you everything, Lila. I will buy a research facility here in Boston. I will make you the chief of surgery, whatever you want. Just come back to me." I looked into his deep, desperate eyes. I remembered the 3 years I had spent waiting for him in the quiet penthouse. I remembered the scent of dog hair he had told me to hide in the back seat. I remembered the French laughter in that private lounge. Mr. Ford, I said, my voice incredibly soft, yet it carried a finality that seemed to shatter the remaining light in his eyes. Do you remember the poem my grandfather used to read to me? Ethan stared at me, his eyes blank. He said. I smiled, my gaze clear and free. That birds born in cages think flying is an illness. I took Adrian's arm, my hand resting gently on his sleeve. But I'm no longer sick, Mr. Ford, I said. And I'm finally back in the sky, where I belong. Without another word, I turned my back on him, walking into the bright, warm ballroom with Adrian, leaving Ethan standing alone in the cold shadows of his own empire. The next morning, the sun rose over the Charles River, casting a warm golden glow across the quiet waters. I stood on the balcony of my small Beacon Hill studio, holding a hot cup of coffee. The air was cool, fresh, and filled with the promise of a new day. My phone, sitting on the small wooden table beside me, buzzed. It was an email from the hospital director. Dr. Hayes, your promotion to Assistant Chief of Pediatric Surgery has been formally approved by the board. Congratulations. I smiled, locking the phone and leaning against the railing of the balcony. Below me, the historic streets of Boston were beginning to wake up, people walking their dogs through the cobblestone alleys, the sound of laughter and distant traffic forming a gentle, peaceful melody. I looked up at the clear, blue sky. A flock of wild geese was flying overhead, their wings beating in perfect, powerful sync as they headed south for the winter, free, untamed, and beautiful. My grandfather had been right. The cage was never strong enough to keep a wild bird forever. And as I took a deep breath of the cool morning air, I realized that I was finally truly home.